let's start. Salamu alaikum and hello to everyone, and salamu alaikum to Mahmudur Rahman. With this third part of the discussion series, we want to deal with the history and current situation in Bangladesh, in particular to examine the signs of global power shifts in terms of how they affect the lives of people in the global south. Were the 2021 protests in Bangladesh already signs of change? And how could a tradition of resistance against an oppressive regime be continued, adopted into these times? To get clarity, we have to look behind the images transported by Western media and question the narrative of the US, NATO, and EU. In former decades, the people in the global north had some kind of awareness about what's going on in the world. Therefore, the home front was fragile, riddled with fighting and struggling. Today, we have the almost total equalization by means of the burial of history of struggle. Now at the eastern borders of the US, EU, NATO land, the war is back again. And like the Berliner Congress, the Congress of Berlin in 1878, or World War I or World War II, these reasons for these orders of peace and wars were the preparation and implementation of the vision of the global south. We have paraphrased the title of Frantz Fanon's work, The Wretched of the Earth, to retrieve a fundamental element in the narrative of the oppressed that is obliterated in post-colonial discourses, struggle. We want to take it out of the academic industrial complex and give it back to those for whom Fanon lived. No, not for academics and not for Fanon experts, so-called Fanonists, but for the people. In this intellectual framework, this can only happen in a limited way. Now I want to introduce our speaker for today, Mahmudur Rahman. Mahmudur Rahman is a renowned author and editor of a national daily in Bangladesh. He has written about a dozen books in Bengali and English languages. Mr. Rahman mostly writes in South Asian politics, economy, and issues related to Islam in contemporary world. His latest book, titled The Political History of Muslim Bengal, An Unfinished Battle of Faith, was published on the 1st January 2019 by Cambridge research scholars in UK. The book narrates the political history of the region encompassing a period of nearly a millennium, beginning with the spread of Islam in the eastern part of South Asia, followed by the establishment of an independent Muslim sultanate in the 13th century, and closing with the 1971 secession from Pakistan and rise of an authoritarian regime in Bangladesh in the 21st century. He is also a regular contributor in newspapers and journals. Mr. Rahman is distinguished and senior professional and former chairman, Board of Investment and Energy Advisor to the government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, is the foremost dissident voice against the current autocratic regime in Dhaka. He was arrested, tortured, and has suffered long imprisonment for his principled stand on human rights, press freedom, and independent judiciary. He wrote his latest published book while in prison from 2013 to 2016. United Nations Human Rights Commission and other eminent human rights organizations recognized him as one of the prominent dissident victims in Bangladesh. A chemical engineer and MBA, Mahmudur Rahman, at a relatively senior age, currently is writing a PhD thesis on the impact of Indian hegemony in the geopolitics in South Asia in the Department of History and Civilization at International Islam University, Malaysia. The title of the thesis is The Rise of the Indian Hegemon and the Security of Small States in South Asia. Mr. Rahman is also continuing his job as editor, Amadesh UK, an online Bengali language daily newspaper. Thus, we thank Mahmudur Rahman for spending his time with us and presenting his thoughts and approaches. We would like to start first with a presentation of Mahmudur Rahman. After that, there will be a question and answer session in which everyone listening can participate. Mahmudur, please, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind words about my life. The host of this discussion meeting and this virtual meeting and the participants, Assalamu alaikum. It's a great pleasure for me to be invited in such a political discussion where we can share our ideas. So without talking much about myself, I would like to briefly discuss about the history of Bangladesh, So Bangladesh is one of the, it's not one of the, it is the most densely populated country in the world. I mean, it's a small country, land-wise, landmass-wise, but the population is quite large. We have a population of nearly 170 million in a land of only 144,000 square kilometer, which makes the population density is about 1,270 per square kilometer. So that's very, very populous indeed. But this part of Bangladesh, is surrounded by, geographically surrounded by giant neighbor India. In fact, the India-Bangladesh land border is the fifth longest land border in the world. And the size of the land border is more than 4,000 kilometers. As you may be aware that the longest land border in the world is between USA and Canada, followed by Kazakhstan, Russia, Argentina, Chile, China, Mongolia, and then it is Bangladesh, India. And we have also a land and maritime border with Myanmar, but that much smaller. So we are basically in between Myanmar and India, and our south is Bay of Bengal. That's our access to the international water. Now, Bangladesh is the eastern half of the largest delta in the world, which is known as Ganges Delta. And historically, it is known that Islam was spectacularly successful in Bengal, which is far from far from Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of our prophet. And the preaching of Islam was very successful in Bengal nearly 1,000 years ago. So the preaching started in the early the second millennium, early part of the second millennium, and it became very successful. And Bangladesh is now a Muslim majority country, and in fact, the ethnic Bangladeshi Muslims are the second largest ethnic Muslim community in the world after the Arab Muslims, which is a big, big surprise if you consider the difference between the cultural difference between the Arabs and the Bengals. So it's still a mystery how so many people converted to Islam in a country like Bengal. Although the seat of Islamic power was in Delhi, in India, which is quite far from Bengal. The political Islam arrived in Bengal in the early 13th century with the victory of Afghan, Turk origin Afghan general, Ikhtiaruddin Muhammad Bakhtiar Khilji. He defeated the last Hindu ruler of Bengal, Lakhan Sen, in 1304. So that's very early part, into 1204. So that is very early part of the 13th century. And then it was under Muslim Sultanate until the British established its colonial occupation in 1757. So during this long period, the Bengal was a sort of a melting pot of Islamic culture, coming from Turkey, coming from the Central Asia and Persia, and also the Arab countries. So the indigenous culture mixed with the Islamic culture coming from these countries, and that gave a very vibrant culture to the unique culture to the Bengali people. In fact, the language Bengali was also created with the patronage of the Muslim sultans, who were not Bengali speakers, who were probably Turk speakers or were Persian speakers. But they really patronized the language, the indigenous language, Bengali, because before the Islamic Sultanate took over the rule of Bengal, the then Hindu, the royal palace, they were supporting mostly the Sanskrit, because they considered Sanskrit it was venerated as a sort of godly language, and the indigenous language of Bengali, it was looked down. And in fact, people were not allowed to use Bengali for their official work. And the palace language was also Sanskrit. It was the Muslim sultans who allowed Bengali to enter into the royal court. So they were that's how the culture started, and it's a unique culture developed in Bengal. Then the British came in 1757, and the British started, because the British took over the power from the Muslim rulers. So they considered all Muslims as enemy of the new colonial master, and they started to support or encourage the Hindu population, indigenous Hindu population, in the government job and in other activities. And the Hindus were also quite supportive of the new rulers because of their enmity to the Muslim earlier rulers, And as a result, what happened? The Muslims started their opposition to the new colonial masters for nearly a century, even after 1757. And the great Sipahi revolution of 1857 was led by the Muslims, mostly by the Muslims. Or Hindus also participated, but the leadership was the Muslims. And in that great revolution, many scholars, they consider that revolution is the first independent struggle of India. But the British, of course, they prevailed, and the patriots, soldiers of the British army, they lost after 6 months of struggle. And then the British continued ruling for another 100 years. And in 1947, after the Second World War, the British decided to leave the subcontinent. And because the Hindus and Muslims, they are fighting with each other, so it was decided by everybody. It was a tripartite arrangement. The Hindu leadership, the Muslim leadership, and also the British colonial power. They decided to bifurcate the subcontinent, and Pakistan was born in 1947. And today's Bangladesh was the eastern half of Pakistan in those days, so it was known as East Pakistan. But then there was the rise of linguistic nationalism, the rise of Bengali nationalism against the western half of the western part of Pakistan. And also you have to understand that geographically it was a unstable state, because the eastern part and western part was separated by about nearly 1,800 kilometers of enemy land. That means 1,800 kilometers of India was separating the two parts of Pakistan, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So I have a feeling, or my understanding is that geographically it was not a feasible state. And then there was also the cultural difference, the linguistic difference, the ethnic difference. So, and also some exploitation by the West Pakistani ruling class. So those contributed in the Liberation War of 1971. And India also strongly supported the Liberation War because India was trying to divide Pakistan. That was their goal from 1947. So India became very successful, and Pakistani army lost in that Liberation War. And the youngest state in South Asia, and till now the last independent state in South Asia, was born on 16 December In fact, although our Independence Day is on 26th of March, but 26th of March is, we declared our independence. But actually the war ended on 16th of December in 1971, and when the Bangladesh independent government was formed. So you see, that was the brief background of Bangladesh. I think people should know about it, because without that, you will not be able to see this country. You know, this is sort of a unique country, because this is the only Muslim majority country surrounded by non-Muslim country, you know, because it is mostly surrounded by India, which is a Hindu country. Then the other neighbor is Myanmar, which is a Buddhist country. And in fact, there is persecution of the Burmese Muslims also in Myanmar, as you are aware, and also the persecutions of Indian Muslims in India. So we are right at the center of persecution, I might say. And then if you look into the east, until we reach Malaysia, there is no second Islamic country, because after Thailand, it is, you know, after Myanmar, it is Thailand. And after Thailand, you reach Malaysia. So until you reach Malaysia, there is not a second Muslim majority country in the east. And when you come to the west, until you reach Pakistan, you don't have a Muslim majority country again. So we are sort of a unique country, a Muslim majority country surrounded by non-Muslim states. So that in itself is quite, you know, is against our overall security. So that feeling is there. The lack of security, that feeling is always there. So now what happened? India helped Bangladesh to attain independence in 1971 because they wanted to establish their control in the eastern theater of the South Asia. They wanted that in the eastern theater, there should be a country which would support, totally support India in all geopolitical you know, policies. They are all geopolitical state policies. But you have to understand that Bangladeshi people are against Indian hegemony. The people are against Indian hegemony. But what happened? Bangladesh is an interesting example where the Western world actually destroyed the democratic system in this country. How I will explain it to you, with the assistance of India. And then now the Western world, they have no influence on that country anymore because India controls Bangladesh. And now China is slowly entering into the politics of Bangladesh. And Western world, which really destroyed the democratic structure of that country by supporting India in 2007. And they have created the present, the fascist regime in this country. You know, during the period 1991 to 2006, for 15 years, we were known as one of the finest example of democratic governance within the Islamic world. Unfortunately, there are very few countries in the Islamic world where really democracy is practiced, as you were aware. So Bangladesh was one of the very unique countries. You know, we had woman prime minister, number one. I mean, in all three elections, there were a woman prime minister. Number two, there was very peaceful transfer of power by free and fair elections. And we had 3 free and fair elections from 1991 until 2001. So, and in each term, at the end of the term, somehow, the incumbent government lost in the election, which means the system was, the democratic rule, you know, democratic governance was taking root. So at that time, what happened? The Afghan War started. The NATO forces, they invaded Afghanistan, and they approached the then government of Bangladesh, which was under the Prime Minister of Begum Khaleda Zia. And it was, the party is known as the Nationalist Party, and they're pro-Islamic party. They were in power at that time. So the Prime Minister was approached by America to give army for Afghanistan, to contribute in the invasion of Afghanistan. But our position was very clear. We said that Bangladesh army will only participate under blue helmet. If there is a UN operation, then of course we will be more than happy to send our troops. But we will not send troops under NATO occupation. So that really, the Americans at that time, as you know, the Bush Jr. was the president and Rumsfeld was the defense minister. In fact, Rumsfeld went to Dhaka and the capital of Bangladesh. He was there for about 24 hours, which is quite unusual. And he waited for a positive response from the then Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia. But he was very enraged when Begum Khaleda Zia refused to participate in the occupation of Afghanistan. And then the then Prime Minister of England, Tony Blair, also went to Bangladesh with the same proposal, but it was also refused. So the Western world was very enraged, and they decided a regime change. And in 2007, the Bangladesh military, there was an army coup with the military coup with the help of the Indians, and totally supported by the Americans and the British. And that army coup actually changed everything. And Indian hegemony, they started to establish, they started to infiltrate into all the government institutions in Bangladesh from 2007. And in fact, a former president of India, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, he wrote a book. He is dead now. He wrote a book, I think it was published in 2017 or 18. And the name of the book is Coalition Years. And in that book, he has clearly said that it was a direct understanding with the army chief of Bangladesh and the Indian government that the present Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina would be brought to power in a stage-managed election in 2008. And that was decided in Delhi in a meeting between the then military chief of Bangladesh and the then Foreign Minister of India, who was Pranab Mukherjee, because Pranab Mukherjee became president afterwards. At that time, in 2008, at the time of the meeting, Pranab Mukherjee was the Foreign Minister of India. So it was decided by India that Sheikh Hasina is coming to power in 2008. And that's exactly what has happened. And this design was totally supported by the West. It was supported by America, and it was supported by the US, and it was supported by the European Union, because they wanted a so-called secular government in power in Bangladesh to support the Western narrative of the world order. So they thought that Sheikh Hasina will be their person to do it. But actually what has happened during the last 13 years, India has really infiltrated into every government institutions. So Bangladesh has become a virtual, undeclared colony of India. It has got no, independent foreign policy now. One of the example I want to share that in regards to Russia-Ukraine war, in the first instance at UN General Assembly voting, Bangladesh abstained along with India to censor Russia for their aggression in Ukraine. So that means America has lost its influence over Bangladesh government. Bangladesh government does whatever is instructed from Delhi. In addition to that, what China has done during the last 13 years, they have used their financial muscle to influence, to get into Bangladesh. They have invested a lot in infrastructure mostly, the way they have invested in other Asian and African countries. So China, if after India, if any country has any influence over the present fascist regime, it is China. So the America-led Western world is now totally out of the scene. So as a result of that, probably to give a message to the present autocratic regime, on the 10th of December last year, the American government has sanctioned the current police chief of Bangladesh and the current, the chief of another elite unit, which is called RAB, Rapid Action Battalion, who is notorious for human rights abuse. So chief of that and another 4 or 5 officers belonging to that organization, that RAB, they have sanctioned 7 or 8 people, the American Treasury, on the day of International Day of Human Rights. But surprisingly, the other Western countries, they have not followed American example yet. Normally, we have seen before that whenever America takes such action, if they impose sanction on somebody like Lukashenko in Belarus, or Putin of Russia, or Myanmar, or North Korea. The Western world, EU and the UK and Australia and the Canada, they immediately follow suit and they also impose sanctions. But in case of Bangladesh, surprisingly, these countries have not yet shown their card. So we don't know what is their position on the human rights abuse in Bangladesh. So this is the geopolitical situation. Now, shortly about the Bangladesh situation, the country has become a totally fascist state. It is a classical Orwellian state where the will of the prime minister is the law of the country. There is no judiciary. The judiciary is under her thumb. So it is completely dysfunctional. The military is totally infiltrated by Indian agents. So, and people have got no voice. There is no freedom of expression. The dissident voices are persecuted. They are either jailed, like me, tortured, like me, or even they become victim of enforced disappearance. Enforced disappearance, and there is no democracy in the country. As I said, in 2008, there was a state-managed election, and in that election, Sheikh Hasina came to power with the help of America, UK, and also, of course, India. India is the main power broker in the whole system in South Asia. And in 2014, this government conducted a farcical one-party election, which was boycotted by all opposition. But somehow, the Western world initially showing anger at an erosion of democratic governance, but accepted the present prime minister like business as usual as part of their global strategy. And in 2018, again, there was a farcical election where people were not allowed to vote. It was like an election of, let's say, Belarus, that type of election, and Sheikh Hasina remained in power. So there will be another election is coming in December next year. We don't know what is going to happen, but in all probability, the present fascist ruler will try to repeat what she has done in 2014 and 2018. Now, to end my story, I mean, let me tell you, Bangladesh is an unique, not unique, very strange example or interesting example of Islamophobia in a Muslim majority country, because the government, they claim to be secular, and the secularism in Bangladesh is basically is anti-Islam. It's not really secular in the sense what European understand as secularism. That is not true in the case of Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, secularism means anything against Islam. And because in India, we have seen the rise of Hindutva politics, the extreme communal politics in India has taken over. So as a result of that, in Bangladesh, we have the impact of that also. And because Mr. Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, he is known for his anti-Muslim rhetorics. He is known for his direct role in the massacre of Muslims in Gujarat riot in 2002. And for that, if you remember, American sanctioned Mr. Modi. Mr. Modi was not allowed to visit America. He was not given American visa until he became the Prime Minister in 2014. But after that, after he became the Prime Minister of India in 2014, the Western world and with America, they embraced Modi. Now, Modi is known for his hatred towards Islam. So when Modi visited last year in 2019, visited Bangladesh, there was a widespread demonstration against him because of his policies, because of his Islamophobia, because of his torture of Muslims, especially in Kashmir, in disputed Kashmir, because the Kashmiri Muslims are fighting for their independence from 1947. In that way, the fate of Kashmiri Muslims are similar to the fate of the Palestinians, because Palestinians are also fighting from 1940, more or less from the same time, 1948, 47. So these two, the Muslims community are mostly persecuted for the last 70 years. So in Bangladesh, people are naturally for their fellow feelings for the Muslims of India and Muslims of Kashmir. They peacefully demonstrated on the street of Dhaka, but that demonstration was ruthlessly suppressed. and the police opened fire against the demonstrator, and more than 20 people were killed. And again, you see, it is very sad when we look into the double standard of the Western world, Western political leaders, and the Western elites, and the Western media. Because when these 20 people were killed by the present government in Bangladesh, the Western media and the Western leaders, they wanted to show that they were the extremists. They were the extreme extremists. And so it is okay to kill the extremist. I mean, that was more or less was the narrative in the Western media. Nobody questioned that how a government can kill its own people only because they are protesting against the visit of a non-Muslim killer, a known violator of the human rights. So that's the sad part of the understanding of the human rights of the Western world. So it is a big surprise that why suddenly America decided to impose sanctions against 7 or 8 people, including the current army chief, current police chief, and the current the elite branch chief, the RAF chief. If they're serious, if they really mean business, if they want that democracy should return to Bangladesh, then they have to do more. I mean, only sanctioning 7 or 8 people who is not going to change the situation on the ground. But if it is to pressurize Sheikh Hasina, the present ruler, to join the so-called Quad, the anti-China alliance, which is formed between America, India, Australia, and Japan. That's why it is Quad. So America is telling Bangladesh to join Quad, but it's not possible for the present regime to join Quad because they need Chinese money. So because they need Chinese money, so this the fascist regime will try to keep a balance between the pressure coming from the Washington and from China. So at the end of the day, what has happened because of the wrong policy of the Western world by supporting an army military takeover in 2007, what has happened? During the last 14 years, 15 years, the Bangladeshi people has lost their freedom and the country has lost its independence. And the Americans, interestingly, and the Western world, they have lost their influence in that country because in Bangladesh, historically, Americans played a role in the politics of Bangladesh. But now it is India who calls the shot. In fact, let me tell you, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, we call it the illegal Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, openly said that she values the friendship of India much more than the friendship of America, because India is her next door neighbor and America is far away at Atlantic. So she has clearly indicated that she will listen to what New Delhi says, not what America says. So that is the geopolitical situation at the present moment. And we people, we are, we want Bangladesh a truly democratic country where people will be able to select their own leaders. They will be able to exercise their democratic rights, where there will be freedom of expression, where the media can work freely without the fear of persecution. And we want to remain, independent from the geopolitical rivalry. We don't want to join any camp. And also, we are an Islamic country. We want to practice our religion freely and without the fear of persecution. Because at the present moment, although there are 90% people of Bangladesh are Muslims, but it is dangerous for the, it is not really, dangerous for any young man, for example. If a young man in Bangladesh, he goes to the mosques regularly in the morning for the morning prayer, after 3-4 days, he will find that the security people, they are following him. Because actually it is like, the Islamic, pro-Islamic people are targeted by the present government. As I say, that Bangladesh is an example of Islamophobia in a Muslim majority country. So we are fighting against this fascist government since 2008. and it's already more than 14 years. And we'll continue our struggle for establishment of democracy and for retaining our independence from the Indian hegemony. So I don't know how long it will take, but we'll not surrender, and we hope that the democratic people in the Western world will support our peaceful and democratic movement, and they will take action, whatever within their capacity, against a very repressive regime in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mahmudur Rahman, for this historic background and for this analysis from you, analysis of global powers who pressure a little people in Bangladesh. I want to begin with a question from our side. You talked about secularity, and this was our question, but you answered it. This is a form of secularity in Bangladesh. Is not like a Turkish secularity, where the state decided what you have to think in as a Muslim, because you said the regime is strict anti-Muslim, Islamophobic. You said, yes.
Yes.
Yes. So on the streets, there are different movements, Muslim movements, or other liberation movements, or people who have other ideas and come together to have a joint movement. Is this something what happens now?
Yes, exactly. That is what is happening. You know, there is a political movement going on because the largest political party, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, they have said that they will not participate in any election under the present regime. So they want an independent and caretaker government for the election to be held under the UN supervision. That is their demand. So that's totally a secular and the democratic demand, that the people should be allowed to exercise their right of franchise. And similarly, at the same time, there are some Islamic political parties like Jamaat-e-Islam. They are also demonstrating on the street, basically against the repression of the government and for re-establishment of the democratic right. In addition to that, there are also religious people who are fighting for their religious rights. You know, as I said, at this moment when I am speaking to you, more than 1,000 the Islamic scholars and Islamic teachers and the students of Islamic school are in jail as a result of the infamous visit of the Indian Prime Minister in 2019. As a consequence of that, not only this present government, they opened fire against peaceful demonstration, killing more than 20 people in 2 days' time, within 2 days, and then they arrested more than 1,000 people. And they are denied bail. They are in jail now for more than 2 years, and we don't know when this government will allow them to go free. So there is also a religious, a movement that has religious tone. But at the end of the day, I expect that the movement will unite, and they will demand a peaceful transfer of power, and then a free and fair election where people will be able to express their desire through ballot boxes. So that I hope, and I'm quite confident, inshallah, that is what is going to happen. But we have to think about it, that this repressive government will not easily give up power. So probably I am also afraid, I'm also worried rather, that there will be more repression coming from this present government during the next, let's say, next 12 months or so. Because during the next 12 months, I expect the struggle to really, the struggle will be more widespread more widespread struggle. So this government will try to stop that, and probably more persecution is coming. So I, again, through you, I appeal to the outside world that you should not forget about Bangladesh. Interestingly, the Western media is more or less silent on this persecution in Bangladesh. They are writing on the Rohingyas who have taken shelter in Bangladesh because of the persecution from Myanmar. And, you know, we have given them shelter, but you have to think about it, that the total numbers of Rohingyas is about 1 million or slightly more than 1 million. So Western world is very much concerned about 1 million Muslims. But what is going to happen to 160 million Muslims in Bangladesh? Because they are also persecuted. So in fact, there is hardly any difference between the persecuted Bengali Muslims in Bangladesh, the citizens of Bangladesh, and the Rohingyas. In certain respect, the Rohingyas are even more fortunate, because the Western world are very much, very much sympathetic to their plight, and even most of the Muslim countries, they are also supporting the Rohingyas. They are helping them. But in case of the persecution of the Bangladeshi Muslims, the Muslim world is also more or less silent, or maybe they are not aware of what is happening in that country.
Yeah. Okay. This is a typical selective way of thinking of hypocrisy of the European countries, and also of some Muslim countries, of course.
Exactly. I mean, let me add one more thing. I mean, yes, we always find that the Western world, the hypocrisy is quite exposed there. The Western world are very critical of China-supported or Russia-supported autocratic regimes. For example, they are very critical about Lukashenko. They are very critical about the Kim of Korea. They are very critical about the Myanmar military junta. But when there is a question of West-backed authoritarian regime, the Western world keeps silent. And there are many examples of West-backed authoritarian regime in the world. And Bangladesh is one of the examples where a West-backed authoritarian regime is persecuting its own people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, of course. You said, you mentioned that the US more or less lose their influence in Bangladesh. And you said also the new player, financial player, is China. And last year, the US had to withdraw from Afghanistan, and the Taliban are now in power in Afghanistan. And you said also there is a tradition between Afghanistan and West Pakistan, Bangladesh. So what do you think is now in this change has some influence on Bangladesh of this change last year? Because the mayor, India was a big loser in this war against Afghanistan.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. In fact, after the Americans and its NATO allies, the biggest loser in the Afghanistan debacle is India, because they have supported the so-called West-backed, the Northern Alliance regime of successive presidents, starting from Karzai and then followed by Abdullah and this Ghani. So India supported it. And then India also invested a lot in Afghanistan. India had established a security apparatus in Afghanistan. They had so many infrastructure in Afghanistan for keeping their intelligence people. They had probably more than 5 consulates in Afghanistan, in addition to the embassy in Kabul. They had everywhere. They had a consulate in Kandahar. They had consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif, everywhere. So basically, what India has tried, that by their presence in Afghanistan, they wanted to encircle Pakistan, which is their historical enemy. Because they wanted that from the West, if they have a friendly government in Afghanistan, in the west of Pakistan, and in the east, India is there, so they can encircle Pakistan. Pakistan could be sandwiched between India and Afghanistan. So after the defeat of the Northern Alliance government and the return of the Taliban in the power of Kabul, India is the greatest loser. And also, Americans and the Western world is now forced to negotiate with the Taliban regime. In the same way, the West is also negotiating with the Iran, because the previous regime, Washington regime, the Trump administration, they stopped all communication with Iran. So now it seems that nuclear agreement is going to be finalized very soon. And in fact, the Secretary of State of United States, Mr. Blinken, he has strongly supported a new agreement with Iran. So what is happening? That probably Americans have understood and realized their mistakes committed in both Afghanistan and also Iran. And they are now reassessing their geopolitical strategy in that area. So if they reassess their geopolitical strategy, what they did after 9/11, they accepted India as their strategic ally in South Asia. And they wanted that India should be performing the policing role in South Asia in support of American policy as part of the American larger strategic policy. But that has apparently backfired. You see, India has lost Afghanistan, so India could not manage Afghanistan properly. Then India has lost, which is not an Islamic country. India has totally lost Nepal, because Nepal has now tilted towards China. Nepal is no more totally dependent on India. They have now a communication and road communication and other things with China. So India has lost influence on Nepal. In the Bhutan, we have seen that China is becoming more active in Bhutan also. So at the end of the day, and in Bangladesh also, the people are becoming very much anti-Indian. People were not so much anti-Indian before, let's say, before the military takeover in 2007, or before the present regime took over power in 2008. The people of Bangladesh were not as such so much anti-Indian, but now the anti-Indian, they have become much more anti-Indian than before. So in fact, India has also lost Bangladesh, but they have established their hegemonic control only through the ruling elites and only through the military and other, through the government infrastructure. But among the people, they have lost their influence. So at the end of the day, I think America is a great loser in Bangladesh also. The way they lost Afghanistan, and now Pakistan, you can see that even Pakistan is now talking to Russia, because Pakistan has a historical friendship with China. And in this, we have seen during the Russia and Ukraine war, Pakistan also abstained in the voting in the United Nations in the attempt of United States to censor Russia. Pakistan also abstained with China, India, and Bangladesh. And then, if you remember, that the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan visited Moscow on the same day the invasion of Ukraine started. So he didn't suspend his visit or delay his visit. So that was a clear message to America that they cannot take a nuclear power Pakistan for granted. So the dynamics in the geopolitics in South Asia is changing very fast. So it's better for America and the Western world to understand it. And it is better for them to understand that India cannot do the policing on their behalf against the Muslim majority population in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They cannot do it. And at the end of the day, if America continues with this policy, they are going to lose further. Already they have lost their influence. They will lose further. The present regime probably to keep their grip on power, they will tilt towards China more, and they will try to make a balance between China and India, like what America. You see, there is a similarity between Bangladesh and Myanmar at the present moment. You know, the Myanmar military junta, they keep a very close relationship with both China and India, but they are against the Western world, because you have seen that India has never criticized the military junta in Myanmar. And when the Rohingya Muslims were persecuted, India didn't utter a single word, didn't protest against the persecution. Similarly, China didn't protest the persecution. It was the Europeans and the Americans who were talking about the persecution of the Rohingya Muslims. So in Bangladesh also, a similar geopolitical thing is rising, because the Bangladesh also will probably follow Myanmar, and they will try to join hands with China and India and give a snub to America and the Western world. And if you see today's news that Russian and Myanmar soldiers, they had a joint parade. So this is again a signal that Russia is also becoming active in that area. So a reorientation of the geopolitics is taking place in that part of the country. And I would blame Western world and the United States and the European Union that it is their making. It is this Frankenstein they have created. This Frankenstein in the form of Sheikh Hasina, the present fascist ruler of Bangladesh, is totally a creation of the Western world. The same way, if you remember, they created Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and they used Saddam Hussein against the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, after 1979. But ultimately, what happened? Ultimately, the Americans went to Iraq and killed Saddam Hussein. But in the bargain, more than 1 million people lost their lives, and a rich country was destroyed by a senseless war, which was based on lies, total lies of so-called weapons of mass destruction. So in the similar way, the Americans actually, they gave birth to this Frankenstein in the form of Sheikh Hasina. So unfortunately, the Westerns, they don't understand the politics of Muslim countries, and they mishandle, every time they have mishandled the internal politics in the Muslim country. There are plenty of examples of this mishandling. And this is going to happen again in Bangladesh. So it is better that America accept their failure and try to take corrective action. I have said one thing, they have lost the influence over the government, but they have they have a means still, if they are serious about it, to really tighten the screw on this government and force them to accept a free and fair election, and force them to hand over power to a neutral caretaker government and have a peaceful transfer of power. Because although the money is coming from China in the form of aids or in the form of investments in the infrastructure, but for Bangladesh, the export market is basically the Western world. Because the main source of funding for Bangladesh is three. One is the money coming from China, and the money coming from multilateral agencies like World Bank and ADB, and the money coming from the diaspora in the form of remittance. Because the remittance is coming from European countries, remittance is coming from America, and remittance is coming from the Muslim world. So America has a role. They can really make their life difficult. And most important is this: Bangladesh is, the economy of Bangladesh is based on garments industry, on ready-made garments industry, on the fabrics and the shirts and the trousers. So Bangladesh is one of the leading exporter of garments in the world. And what is the market for Bangladesh? The market is European Union, and America is the market. So there really, America and the Europeans can play hard and make life difficult for this present government. So I would expect that America, they learn from their mistake quickly, and they should push Sheikh Hasina so that Bangladesh returns to its democratic governance as we witnessed during the period 1991 to 2006. We want a country where there is freedom of people, there is freedom of press, and human rights is maintained.
Okay. Thank you for this comparison to Frankenstein. But you said the US and the EU could play a role, a better role than in the history. But if you have values like to create Frankensteins all over the world, what could we expect from them? So yes, sometimes the Frankensteins will come back to Europe, and then they maybe react in some other ways. So I have a question from the audience to you, from Mr. Sali. Even though it might not be your field of expertise, do you think Bangladesh is comparable to the situation in Egypt under Sisi, a so-called Muslim country with an explicit instead of implicit anti-Islamist policy?
Excellent question. I have a feeling that these are the two examples, which is like the two sides of the same coin. The only difference is Sisi is a male and Sheikh Hasina is a female. There is one difference. And the second difference is Sisi comes from military background, but Sheikh Hasina comes from a political background. Other than that, there is a very strong similarity between the two countries. And I totally agree with the person who has asked this question. And I think Sisi and Hasina, as I said before in my presentation, that the Western world, they want to remain silent on the persecution of the Western-backed authoritarian states, authoritarian rulers. So Sisi and Hasina, and I said that Bangladesh is not the only examples. There are plenty of examples in other countries also. Sisi is another example when the Western world is totally supporting an authoritarian regime as part of their global geopolitical strategy. But at the end of the day, I want to repeat, every time Western world have found that they have mishandled the situation. They have done the same thing in Iraq. They have done the same thing in Afghanistan, and they have done the same thing in Bangladesh and also in Egypt. So I also hope that one day Egyptian people will revolt against this autocratic regime, and they will get the freedom. Because if we remember, the Arab Spring started at Tahrir Square. So we hope that another Arab Spring will come. But unfortunately, we have seen in the Arab world that the gains of Arab Spring is more or less completely lost, because we have Sisi in Egypt ruling in Egypt, and also in Tunisia, where actually this Arab Spring started. In Tunisia, we are now seeing that another autocrat is rising, and people have no freedom there also. So it's a sad history of everywhere in the Muslim world. What can you say? It's our limitations also, and it is also our failure. We have to blame the Ummah also, because why in so many Muslim countries there are autocrats? We have to ask it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your views. And a question from our side is, for the last 30 years, the European settler state of Israel has been very successful in conquering the markets of South Asia, stabilizing its political influence through economic power. A key partner in this development is India. Can you assess for us the importance of India in terms of its close ties to Israel, especially with regards to Bangladesh? And these ties are ideological, political, and military ties that brought India together with Israel.
You see, Israel is working with India, or India is working with Israel for a long time now. And they are working together in the security field against Pakistan, against the Kashmiri, the freedom fighters. And also in the case of Bangladesh, actually India and Israel are working together. And Sheikh Hasina, the present regime, is a junior partner of that alliance, And if you see to the family background of Sheikh Hasina, in fact, one of the nieces of Sheikh Hasina is presently a member of the parliament from the Labour Party in UK, and her name is Tulip Siddiqui. In fact, the uncle of Tulip Siddiqui is the main man responsible for all. He's a retired army person. He was a major general, now retired. His name is Tariq Siddiqui. And Tariq Siddiqui is involved in every single cases of extrajudicial killing and enforced disappearance. Now, this Tulip Siddiqui is married to a British national. Probably she maintains a very close relationship with the Jewish lobby in UK. And in fact, she used to, before, in her Facebook, she used to openly declare that she is a friend of Israel. So they have a family link, this Sheikh Hasina. And also Sheikh Hasina's younger sister, the other sister, she is also a British citizen. She lives in UK, the mother of Tulip Siddiqui. And then the brother of Tulip Siddiqui, his name is, Redwan Siddiqui. Redwan Siddiqui is also married to a Finnish girl. So I think they have very good connection with Israelis. So it is like Egypt. It is like Egypt that Sisi has a very good connection with the Israeli government. The same case in Bangladesh. So it's a very strange alliance, you know. At the same time, Sheikh Hasina is friendly with Israel and India, and also now romancing with China. So it's a very strange sort of a political accommodation. So we have to see how long it continues. But Israeli factor is important for our politics, although it's very far from Bangladesh.
Okay. So yes, maybe we should not finish this session with the image of Labour Party members in Britain and Israel and India. So let's think about the people in the streets of Bangladesh and how they see or saw the Palestinian resistance in 2021 from Gaza. The people are very aware of this and encouraged by the resistance of Palestinians?
Let me tell you, I mean, I was not in Bangladesh in 2021, so it's very difficult for me. I'm outside the country to say what is the actual situation. But from whatever interaction I have with the people of Bangladesh, I can say that they are very supportive of the resistance of the Palestinians, and they feel they have a great feeling for the people who are fighting for their independence from the illegal occupation of Israel for such a long time. And the Gaza people, definitely, they gave a very heroic fight. And although it was unequal, because, you know, and again, we talk about the Western hypocrisy. In the case of Gaza, we have seen that the women and the children, they were fighting with stones against the automatic weapons of the Israeli armies. But they were labeled as terrorists by the Western media and the Western press. But you see, in the case of Ukraine, when the same media is showing the ladies of Ukraine, the Ukraine women, they are practicing with guns, and they are being given Molotov cocktails, and they are saying that they are freedom fighters because they are fighting against the Russian occupation. So the double standard is so apparent, the hypocrisy is so apparent by this difference in the treatment. The same CNN is calling the unfortunate Palestinians terrorists, and they are hero worshipping the freedom fighters in Ukraine. So, but again, coming back to Bangladesh, the people are very much supportive of the Palestinians. I am very confident about it, and they have great respect for this resistance to occupation. And we pray to Allah that someday the Palestinians will also get an independent and viable state. And the Western world will, will show less hypocrisy. But I don't know whether there will be any change in near future.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mahmoud Rahman. I think this is a good point to round up the discussion. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who participated for sharing their input and contributions. I think the best way, or we as Star Janub think the best way to end this event is to mark the start of putting these valuable thoughts into actual work. And you said to us, we should not forget about the people of Bangladesh. We should bring their agenda to the streets or in Europe. And yes, it's our duty to do this. So thanks again, and ma salama and goodbye, Mahmudur, Rahman.
Thank you very much, Brother Marcus. Hope to see you again and discuss about the global issues.
Thank you very much. And I will write you an email after this event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.